Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is The Devil Strikes at Night by Robert Siodmak from 1957. This was recommended to me by a friend of the channel, Roger Kirby, who did a review of this himself on his own channel, which I'll leave in the description below. It's a far better video than this one will be. Robert Siodmak is one of those directors that left Germany before or just at the start of the Second World War, came over to Hollywood, made lots of famous films like The Spiral Staircase and The Killers, and then he actually returned to Germany in the 50s where he continued to make films up until 1969, so his career runs like from 1930 to 1969. I like just about all the Siodmak films that I've seen, but for me this might actually be his best. This is a phenomenal film that is one of the best films I've seen this year, without a doubt. This is a Kino Lorber Region A. This is a kind of older Kino Lorber Region A, doesn't have the black spine. This has an audio commentary by film historian Imogen Sarah Smith, and that's the only extra. As we know, Kino Lorbers sometimes have a load of extras and other times they don't. But the film is the thing for certainly this release. Have you ever seen a film that kind of gives you some pep in your step and some slide in your glide? This is definitely one of these films. It stars Mario Adorf in one of his earliest performances, who's had a really underrated, amazing career. I mean, he's now 92 and he made a film last year. He's kind of more famous for the Italian crime films of the 70s and the Years of Lead films. But he makes a young appearance in this film. Peter Karsten's in it, who you'll probably recognise, and it's kind of some familiar faces, but also there's a German cast. And I'll say right now, Siodmak couldn't have made this in Hollywood, I don't think, because it is not putting any slight on Hollywood films, but this is a bit dark and a bit truthful, and because it is the German cast, it just feels a lot more authentic than if it was a Hollywood film set in Germany with American actors playing Germans. Obviously made in 1957, it is kind of looking back at World War II, and there might be some things in it that may or might not actually be kind of accurate. It is based on a true story of essentially a serial killer who was murdering women while the war was going on. It focuses on a detective who comes out of hospital after serving in the army. He's got a bit of a limp, and he kind of uncovers this case. Originally there was a murder in 1939, this is set in 1944, and he comes across it while he is wallpapering a colleague at his work's house. He comes across the case and it's all wallpapered up, and then later it rings a bell and he uncovers the wallpaper to look at the kind of news article or the wanted poster. Again, it's about papering over history, which is kind of a theme of the film. And then he has a theory about who's behind it, and he, spoiler alert, he does find the person responsible, but the Gestapo has other ideas depending on what the suspect heritage is. If they were a Jew or a gypsy, the Gestapo's response would be slightly different than if it was a German who was doing it. Even if it was a German with limited mental capacity. The Gestapo, though, there's wonderful scenes with the detective and the Gestapo leader, who again, these are scenes that probably couldn't get away with in America just because they're so kind of brutal and honest and real. And he talks about how he would like to pass a law, if there's family weakness, as in like mental illness or whatever, and talks about an eradication of misfits. There's a lot going on in the film. Another thing that will immediately, well, apart from the subtitles, the German language, the other thing that might make you realise this isn't a Hollywood film is, as good as Hollywood films are in the 40s and 50s, sometimes they do have an overbearing score, and they do have, like, every scene has to be scored. Whereas you'll notice watching The Devil Strikes at Night, there's plenty of scenes that have no score, and you actually get peace and quiet, and then when there's need for a score kind of comes in, but again, it's not overbearing. Now Voyager is one that springs to mind, which I absolutely loved the film, but the score was just so overbearing and overwrought. The one thing you will notice if you watch this, the score is not there all the time, which sometimes in even like film noirs that I love, sometimes the score is just a little bit too much. So this is a much more adult, again, not that Hollywood films aren't adult, but this is a really adult, mature film. It's shot beautifully. There's a scene of one of the murders specifically that's purely out of the silent era. There's a beautiful use of a spotlight that a character just slowly walks into. The use of darkness as an entrance or an exit for characters. We're kind of, the film starts in a very kind of, not necessarily upbeat, but kind of almost comedy, as we have this character who's an officer but not quite a completely successful officer, and he's in charge of giving awards to a group of female trainees. He has a Hitler moustache, but we see him later in a scene with his mistress when he's drunk. He has holes in his socks, which I think is a nice little touch. And she becomes not necessarily the first victim of the killer, but one of the victims of the killer, and then this officer is put on trial for the crime, but whether he did it or not is one of the threads of the film, and the detective's compulsion to see this guy gets justice if he is innocent. And again, the film is questioning, what is justice during wartime? An innocent man not being executed against, the millions of people that were being executed for being innocent as well. What's more important? The Gestapo leader is genuine threat. Obviously, when the detective is doing stuff that he likes, he's very pally and jovial. He does make entrances when he walks like a gangster, which is probably not not a kind of coincidence. And then when the detective does things that displease the Gestapo head, there is a real menace and there's a real threat there. The general feeling of everybody around is, the Gestapo, the ones that are the really bad people. We do see German troops and they're just like ordinary Germans. They know, at one point they're going to the front, but they know it's the rear because it's 1944 and they can sense all is not well, whereas it's the Gestapo that are really portrayed in the film as, the real bad guys. And the Gestapo leader, again, it's a great performance, but it's never cartoonish, which sometimes films about Nazis and about the SS and the Gestapo can easily go over into kind of cartoonishness. But this portrayal and the scenes between the detective and the Gestapo leader are just absolutely fantastic. At one point, they're having this conversation at the office, and then a party breaks in on them. So it's like, yes, all the German soldiers are out there dying, and there's obviously people in concentration camps dying, but in the Gestapo they're having champagne and ball gowns. The detective isn't a party member, which obviously is, the Gestapo is always like, why aren't you a party leader? And so at the drop of a hat, that kind of amiable, you're doing what I want you to do, this is making me pleased, can easily turn on a dime, and it is suitably chilling, even though there is actually, in the early part of the film, there are some kind of funny moments. That's more real comedy rather than kind of forced comedy. This is not to be or not to be. The Gestapo forms real threat even to the detective. Initially when he's introduced to a lower member of the Gestapo, he kind of looks down on him until he sees his war record, and then he kind of warms to him. So it's all about, what have you done for me lately? Are you going to do what I tell you? Are you going to please me, or are you going to piss me off? And the outcome is going to be different. Again, another reason why Siodmak probably couldn't make this in America is because the film doesn't necessarily follow a Hays Code, shall we say. That's all I'll kind of say about it. But it's real and it's truthful. The film does have an air of The Night of the Generals, which was made in the 70s, late 60s, 1970 I think, and Citizen X, the wonderful HBO film with Stephen Ray and Donald Sutherland about Chikatilo, the first kind of Russian serial killer, as far as the state not really wanting to admit there's a serial killer. So again, this film is about PR. It's about some killings can be overlooked, whereas other killings have to be done. Again, that sense of what justice is when you're slaughtering millions, where actually is justice, and does the life of one person matter over trying to save a country or a nation that's at war. So there's great performances. Adolf is really good. I don't really want to get into too much of the plot. If you have watched a lot of noirs and you've watched a lot of films from the 70s, you'll probably be able to predict how things go. Like I say, the woman, the female colleague that the detective wallpapers her house, Helga, they've got a wonderful relationship because it's not romantic, but you can tell that they both care for each other, and it is genuinely moving in the final parts of the film, which again I'm not going to go into. Whereas again, if this was made in Hollywood, it would be more obviously a romantic relationship. Excuse me. It would be obviously a romantic, and there'd be lush romantic music every time they were in a scene together. So it's there, but again, it's not overtly there. And even Helga's cousin, who is an officer, and for 90% of the film, he's tipsy and trying to make advances to her. The scene where he is sober is just absolutely phenomenal, and again, quite moving. So it's a film that is absolutely fantastic. It's about a lot of stuff. There's various threads going through it that I'm not going to go into detail and spoil completely. It's moving. It's genuinely dark and chilling in places. I think it's still relevant, the subject that they're talking about. And again, I'm not knocking Hollywood films because I love Hollywood films, certainly of that period, but he couldn't have made this in Hollywood, I don't think. Or he could have, but it just wouldn't have been as good. It wouldn't have been as truthful, and it wouldn't have been as real as it is in the version here. So thanks very much for watching. Once again, thank Roger Kirby for making his own video, which again I'll put in the description. You can check it out and subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. Just another wonderful Kino Lorber. Again, this is a Region A, but it's just a fantastic film. The print looks wonderful, and I would highly recommend it if you're a fan of Siodmak. It's essential because I actually think it's the best film that he's done that I've seen. Again, my opinion is not fact, but this is an absolute corker. So thanks very much for watching this random review. Hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitude from Solitude Films, saying farewell.